Welcome. I hope you all had a good lunch and I'm not too tired now for the next 40 minutes. So welcome to the joy and pain of deploying XenApp in enterprise environments. My name is Sinisha. I come from Germany. I'm doing terminal services, remote desktop services, and Citrix projects for quite a while now, mostly for bigger companies. And today I want to talk about the good and the bad things that can happen to you if you start as consultant in such a project. So let's talk first about the joy. So I like my job very much, being a Citrix consultant, because you have to know so many things to be able to implement big Citrix environments. So we need to have knowledge about Active Directory, file services, remote access technologies, and all that stuff. And that makes that job so interesting. So it's never boring because you have to keep up with all the new stuff that is coming out every month and every year. But there's also a pain side of the project, because if you start as consultant in big environments, you have to deal with many different teams. So it's not like when you're a small environment, you have the chance to install the database server, have all the rights you need, you install all the Citrix components, and everything is up and running. It's a little bit more complicated because we have to deal with database departments, with firewalls, with networking, and so on and so on. And there's one thing that's really painful is, if something goes wrong, there's always one who's guilty. It's the Citrix guy. Because the user calls the help desk, Citrix is not starting, the application is slow, everything's messed up, profile is corrupted. So there's always the guy who's guilty. And in the next 38 minutes, I want to pick some of the topics that can arise during such a project. Talk about the problems that can come up and give you maybe an idea how you can come around the problem. Okay. So let's first start with the database, guys. So if you come with a big environment, it's like you need a database for your site, because unless you don't have a database, you're not able to install anything on it. So you start going to the database guys and say, yes, you can have a database, but you won't have any user rights to create this database. And what you can do is at this place, start the Citrix Studio console, and usually you would insert the database name there, click next, everything would be up and running in a few seconds with the latest versions. It's a very good process. But in enterprise environments, you need to generate the scripts that you give to the database guys. And there's, you can do it manually, but I prefer the automated way in bigger environments. There are a few commandlets you can use to create the different databases you need to get a XenApp site up and running. And usually we don't have only one controller in a bigger environment, we have a few more, like 2, 4, 8, 16, depends on how many locations you have in place. And the first one you created in the previous slide, the controllers will be added automatically to that script, but all the other additional controllers need to be created, additional scripts to be to have the permission to access the database. Now if you created those database scripts, you give these scripts to your database administrator, take care that the collation is the right one, and that they use SQL mode to run these scripts, because if they don't use SQL mode, it won't work. And if they are ready and you get the database back, you are able to start the Citrix Studio console, type in the name, and everything should be working fine. If you get an error, you need to check back with the database administrators if they really run that, because sometimes they say they do it, but they don't do it, actually. Or if you maybe have a firewall problem in place. So now we have our database. Now we need to have the installation packages for our Citrix infrastructure. And that's a little bit complicated because in bigger environments there are maybe packages sitting not right in front of your desk, or maybe on another floor. Sometimes you have people sitting in India or Eastern Europe, you have no direct contact with them. And if you start in a new project, it's unlikely also the fact that these people don't have any knowledge about multi-user environments. So how do I create a package that is really running stable in a multi-user environment? So you need to be aware of the fact that you need to do a lot of communication and consulting stuff with them until they are able to create packages that are really useful for a Citrix XenApp environment. That's one of the biggest issues when you talk to many customers, even in big environments, they install the infrastructure servers even today manually. So they ask like, why should I install the server automatically? I do it one time and then I'm done. But I think that is a little bit, the thought is a little bit too short because I will talk about staging in a few minutes, and if you start in big environments, you maybe have like a development environment, a pre-production environment, and a production environment, and you start building things up so that you can test them roughly. If you have NetScalers in front, you should have a pre-production environment where you have the possibility to test load balancing mechanisms if you do changes. And if you start with staging, then you're not only installing one component, maybe you are already installing it 10 times because you need so. And if you have more than one data center location, you can do it 20 times maybe. Depends on how big your environment is. And that is why I say that you try to always create standardized packages that are reproducible and that are also deployable through a standardized deployment process, just in case you get hit by a car, that the other guy who's in charge can create the same infrastructure component from scratch without the need to do reverse engineering or something like that. And now if you have a look at the Citrix standalone installers, I don't know how many of you started with 7.1. It was a little bit not so good from a standalone installer perspective. So Citrix created standalone installers for the VDAs. And if you go to the packages, it's very easy to give these NSIs and exe files to create automated application installation packages. But the controller is missing. And one of the last projects I was just going to the packages. I had the ISO file, which is about 3 gigabytes in size, and said, okay, I need an automated installation for the controller. And they said, like, what should we do with that file? Because they integrate all the application packages in, for example, System Center, and then these packages are distributed over the network to co-locations, wherever your data center is located. And you won't have 3 gigabytes of data size being replicated between the locations. So they told me, figure out how to minimize the application package for the controller. And I thought a bit about it, and I don't know if you can see it good, but I copied from the ISO file, from the sources file, it's a desktop server, set up a folder, copied it to another location and started the setup. And it turned out the process could not be completed. But if you look where the log file is stored, and the log file from the Citrix controller installation or from the Citrix installation itself is very good. If you look at it, if you look at that location, you will see somewhere here down in the end that it says the Scout MSI is missing. So I started to copy that again. And if you do that 20, 30 times in a row, looking at every process, what happens, you will sometimes figure out how many files are missing or what you need to get a successful installation. And in the end, the controller installation package is about 152 megabytes big. That's okay for the packages if you need to redistribute them. And it's working really fine. And if you are interested, I documented this on my website. So maybe if you have a customer who's telling you need to reduce their installation package size, maybe it helps you. So there are other guys who try to install things on your infrastructure, and the software update guys are really sometimes not so easy to get into the process of how we patch multi-user environments in big companies. And what mainly happens is that if you don't have processes that tell you how software packages are installed, it can happen to you that if you have staging in place, that the production is patched before you ever had the chance to test it in a development environment. And that is really cool if, like in October last year, Internet Explorer 11 patch came out, and the effect was that all of the applications that were started over Internet Explorer allocated 2.5 times more RAM than usual. There came a patch a month later that resolved that issue, but imagine if you have a 40,000 user farm that is perfectly sized, what happens to your environment or your help desk calls you get. So people are like going crazy. And another big point is software updates can kill your automated software deployment cycles, because System Center, I don't know how many use electronic software delivery products or System Center. Okay, quite a few. If you start creating task sequences or collections and you need a reboot, for example, you install a Visual C++ redistributable and you do a reboot, then the Windows Server Update Service may come to the conclusion that he has an update for that specific component. And depends a little bit on the configuration, but it can happen that your task sequence fails because he sees that there is another process just trying to install updates for these components. And one of my customers had a task sequence with a System Center in place, and it took about 14 hours to deploy a complete EDA with 60 applications, because they had scripts after every component that was checking and rebooting the server if there are updates in places. So it's like going really crazy. I would recommend just to disable Windows updates when you have a specified task sequence running and doing it at the end. Or you take care that all the updates that may take place for that specific time, because you need to maintain these installation sequences, that they are all up to date. If you look at the recommended patches we need for Citrix XenApp or for remote desktop services, there are two. This one is good. That's a good knowledge base article. I started a few months ago looking at the Microsoft recommended patches, and if you dive deeper, you can see that you have many prerequisites in front of some of these patches. Depends on the role you are deploying. And I found that annoying, because you may download, it's about 3 GB of size for the updates, the roller packs, updates, and so on, to get a fully patched system. But not all of them are installable at the end, because there are some rollups that took care of that. And I created a little script which may also maybe help you. You can run it on an RDS server. It checks which RDS roles are installed and shows you which of the patches that are recommended are missing. So it's not installing anything, but just to give you an idea what is missing and what you can install. Okay. Another recommendation about packages. I've seen that also many times, because again, the packages that are not aware of the fact that you have multiple users on a box. Many people that need to inject packages that need to inject user-specific settings use the active setup key to inject during logon the settings they need. And this can also lead to the fact that your first logon, if a user is new to a Citrix infrastructure, takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on what settings they are doing there, or they're also running scripts. So you should take care that you prevent the packages from using this method of injecting user settings into the user profile. From my perspective, if you do it carefully, because maybe some of you have seen Helge's presentation last year in Lisbon, how GPOs can, what was the title?
Well, mess up your login time, basically.
Yeah, okay. They can mess up the login time, correct. Therefore, you should use that carefully to implement user settings. And again, if you're running System Center, the Citrix VDA standalone installer uses access code 3 instead of null. So it can happen that your installation is running successfully from a packaging side, but the task sequence fails because it's not installed. And there are many other applications that are also using other access codes. I don't know why they're doing that, but that's a big problem. So let's talk about staging. Staging is, from my perspective, a crucial thing in enterprise environments. You need to have different environments where you can test things before you deploy them into production. And the main purpose is that you get insights into your changes. So everything you do should be roughly tested before you deploy it into production. And depending on the customer size, we have 2 to 6 stages that you can see in some financial departments a little bit more than in others. But it gives you the possibility to really test your changes you are trying to achieve in an environment. And some of the big ones are still not using this process. They're like, I couldn't imagine that many companies are doing that. So they have like PBS, they open the image, they install an application, seal the base image, deploy it, and wonder why some things are not working as expected. Especially when you have many applications and natively installed and you have no AD in place. Because sometimes there's an old-fashioned self-written application that they're deploying. It overrides some of the OCX files or DLLs, and 3 other applications are not working anymore, and nobody had the chance to test it. So you shouldn't do that. From my perspective, you should have at least 3 stages. So the first one is the test stage, where you as a company, IT department, are able to implement new changes like software updates, application packages, Citrix group policies, whatever you can imagine. And then you switch over with these changes into a pre-production environment where real users are working. Because if you deploy applications and you test with one user, I had that several times, maybe the application manager tests the application, says it's running fine. When you deploy an application in production, some applications really behave differently under load. So you have a memory leak, for example, or something like that. So you always need to take care of the fact that your pre-production service should be treated as the production service, and that there are multiple users who are running workloads on that. And in a perfect world, I know we are not living in a perfect world, all IT departments, all teams that are doing changes in an infrastructure environment should be bound to this process. Because I will talk about that in a few seconds. If the security guys don't align to that process and create a group policy for every stage on their own, and they do things on a domain level and link a group policy to a domain level, you're again at the problem that all 3 stages at once are changed with the new setting. And that's the reality, I think. It's no technical problem to do it. It's more like a communication management problem at this place you need to take care of to get the problem out of the way. So let's talk about a little bit about the security guys, because every time I start somewhere, it's a new discussion, because every company has other security guidelines. And this is one of the funniest, because I was asking, well, why do you want to have a print spooler running on your server? What do you want with that? Sure, users need to print, but also the VDA installation will fail if the printer spooler is not running. And there are many other funny side effects that can happen. I had an environment with 4,000 users. It was running great for 4 weeks. Standard Sub 7.6, feature pack 3, everything was running fine with single sign-on 4.8. And from one day to the other, single sign-on was not working anymore. It's like, why is it not working? I don't have a clue. until we got to the point that they enabled this policy setting that leads to the fact that you always get a prompt, no matter what you do. And they linked the policy on the domain level.
But did they have this at least in change management?
No.
Oh.
No. Would be perfect. Another thing that happened, helpdesk was logging on to the VDAs and were a little bit astonished about the fact that they couldn't see any users anymore. The same department, just another day, was also setting via group policy and removed the helpdesk users from the debug programs policy at this place. There was a machine policy, and nobody was able to see the usernames of the processes behind the users that were logged on. It's not so funny. So, group policies can damage many things in your environment. So what I see basically is with big companies, you have about 40 to 60 group policies in place for your servers. When you start somewhere where you go on implementing the new environment. And what happens here is, I think standard setting is about every 90 minutes a group policy refresh interval is starting with the offset of 30 minutes, plus minus. Sometimes there's so many group policies in place that the time is not sufficient to do the changes. And so it happens that a group policy service takes about 15 to 20% of your CPU performance, constantly doing changes in your infrastructure. And what I recommend at this place is that you shut that off, and it's sufficient if you apply the policies once when the server starts up. Because during the day you won't have so many changes in an environment that is controlled that you need these policies to be applied. And another thing I see is that there's a lot of confusion about policies. So there are some guys who create one policy for one setting. There are other ones who are creating millions of policies with millions of settings that are activating, deactivating, activating, deactivating stuff because of the link policy order. You need to, for a good implementation of group policies, you always need to see the big picture and start from the beginning instead of just starting from your organizational unit, because there are maybe things that are creating problems before that. What I do, basically, when I go to a customer, I try to create groups of servers in organizational units, and I try to have a different kind of policies for specific use cases. So I create mainly an FV policy where only FV settings are in there. This makes troubleshooting in case you have to look something up a lot easier. And try to avoid WMI filters because it will kill you a lot of times. But it can also happen that in a big environment you are not even able to change anything because Active Directory is taking care. There's something like a process behind changing group policies. When you're on the Citrix side, then it maybe makes sense to think about creating policies in the Citrix Studio console because you have the fingers on it and you can change things. And it also leads to the fact that it's a little bit faster than GPOs. But again, if you do all the stuff via group policies and put only one component out of that, it makes troubleshooting a lot harder for the guys to doing Citrix group policies for you. So let's talk about these guys. The last Friday of December, I had a call from a customer. This was also, I don't know, it's a little bit scary. So they called, the whole infrastructure was not working anymore. I thought like, okay, let's have a look. And I dialed in, took me 15 minutes to log onto the server, another 15 minutes to open up the event viewer. And what I could see was a little 6 letters move AV. And I thought, okay, that's no Citrix problem. That's cool. What happened was one of the operations guys from Eastern Europe had moved all the infrastructure servers to another scan group, and nothing was working anymore. So this can have a huge impact on your performance. So always look at the recommendations you get from Microsoft regarding scan exclusions, and also have a look at all these Citrix related antivirus exclusions. At the end I have a little comparison before after of all the optimizations I did in the last project, and the difference is huge. So now let's talk about infrastructure updates, because it's also complicated as getting the site database up and running. So typically you have, it's only an example, you have two locations, you have NetScalers in front, you have 50% delivery controller storefront on one side and 50% on the other side. If I start thinking about upgrading the infrastructure, it's not so easy as having one system where you only do click, start installer, and you go on. It's a little bit more complicated. And what I basically like to do always at the customer side, I create a virtual delivery agent, terminal server administrative machine, where all the consoles are installed that are needed to administrate such an environment. And this is the starting point where I start my upgrade process, because depending on how many helpdesk users you also have that are doing Citrix stuff and something like that, you can have also multiple. But I start with one, update all the components to be able to, in case something goes wrong, have a backup on the other side, so I can switch back. And then I start updating controllers, vice versa, always 50%, because if you would upgrade all of these components here and something goes wrong, like a network error or anything else, you're completely down. Because during the upgrade progress you have a little bit of downtime. So now if you want to do a manual upgrade, we upgrade the components, then we start the studio, and we again get a box where we can create scripts for the manual update. And it's basically two scripts, one that disables all the database connections from the controller to the database, so it nulls them all out. Then you are able to give the database scripts to your database administrators, they do the upgrade, and afterwards you run the enable services scripts that enables the database connection again to your database server. And basically it looks like this. Citrix has also recommendations on that, but I added a few things, so you should first check your subscription if you do an upgrade. Then you should tell the database guys to do a database backup and a restore test. That seems to be a simple point, but I had the situation that they had a backup, something went wrong, but they were not able to restore it. And you should test that before, even in very large environments. That is really a big point. And if you have database administrators sitting somewhere at the end of the world, take care that they are available, because they go home if something goes wrong during your infrastructure upgrade, and then they don't take care about if you are in trouble or not. So also very simple point, but really should take care of that. And then create VM snapshots of all the infrastructure components, because that's the simplest way of making a backup. You can switch it back and you're up and running again when the database restores. And before you start the upgrade process, you have the possibility in the Citrix Studio console to run a test site, test catalog, test delivery group. It checks for basic settings like is the firewall okay, and so on. A good point to start with. Then you start the first admin VDA, like I said, upgrade the controllers, go on. Then you can create upgrade scripts in the studio, run the disable PS1 on the controllers, the database guys on the database scripts, you enable the controllers again, and look if everything is fine. So that's the point where you have the possibility if something goes wrong, you can go back, or if everything's fine, then you should upgrade the rest of the infrastructures. And what makes the update really, really easier is that the storefront and the VDA components don't need to be upgraded in the same interval. You can take your time, because if you upgraded the environment, you have the chance to choose on which level the machine catalog should run. And it's if you need all the new features from the version you upgraded, you should upgrade immediately. But if you have time, you can just relax and do it whenever you want to. So now let's talk about the start menu. You upgraded everything. Who of you is using a Citrix receiver start menu integration? Is it good? Working? Okay, that's good. So that is what really annoys me. From version to version from Citrix receiver, things change and work differently. So with 14.2100, it could take 10 minutes until start menu links were propagated. And you should think about if you use this integrated setting or if you try to implement start menu settings another way if you run publish desktops. If you create shortcuts via GPO is no good idea, because if you create about 100 shortcuts with group policy preferences, it will take you about 5 to 10 seconds log on delay. That's the time you need to be aware of. And I started, I think 30 years the classical way, rubber copy script, put the links somewhere, inject them into the user profile. It's the fastest way even today. So I recommend that really. But for the ones who are really running that and maybe have problems with conflicting settings, so if you have thin clients in place running published desktops, and you maybe have fat clients in place that are have the same base application sets, but maybe start only a few of the applications that are available through remote desktop services or Citrix XenApp, then I would recommend that you create 2 stores, one for the published desktops, one for the fat client, because then you are able to hide specific applications for the fat clients with a keyword. It's very cool because nobody wants to have 2 times 7-zip shortcut in a start menu on a fat client. You go ahead and create a keyword, and it's documented here in the blog article. You can just run this small little command and you're good to go to hide specific shortcuts. Now to the next one, troubleshooting. What tools are available to troubleshoot in such in Citrix environments? So first of all, regarding application-specific settings, it's a good start to have a look at the system drivers tools like Process Monitor or Auto Runs, something like that, if you want to have a look how your system behaves. The second one, regarding group policies, what I basically do is I go to a server, I run RSOP MSC, and it takes some time depending on how much group policies you have in place, but you get all the settings for specific users if you want, and you see directly from which group policy the setting is coming. So it's really a really nice tool to have a basic look at where you should look if something is not working as expected. The third one is the Citrix Supportability Pack. So there are a lot of tools. I will talk about a few of them just in a second. There are a lot of tools that can help you check the health of your Citrix environment or to help you troubleshoot connection problems. And for the last one, Uber Agent saved my ass a lot of times during projects, really, because you have so much insight in what is happening on your infrastructure. I will show you just in a few seconds. So if you have connection problems with your controllers and the database and you don't even know where to start, it's a good point to enable the log files for the Citrix services. It's basically one little command for every service exe you have. You can run it with -log file, and you can create a log file for that and log everything the services do. But take care to, if you're done, to disable the log file functionality because your hard disk will be full in just a few days. So in big environments, it's mostly the case that you don't have access to Telnet. So in the past, we had the possibility Telnet was always installed. In big environments, it's not even there, and you mostly have not the chance to install Telnet because you're not allowed to. The Citrix project utility in the supportability pack is a really cool small exe file. You can copy to the server or run it directly from where you are, and you can check for specific host connections. So it's maybe the same functionality, but you don't have to install anything to troubleshoot it. Another cool tool is XDPing. You can run it on a controller, or you can run it on a VDA to check for basic communication problems. You can check if your Kerberos authentication is correctly configured. You can check if DNS entries are correct, if the NS lookup is working or whatever. So you should, if you have problems, always run on one of both infrastructure components to get an idea what could be wrong. If you're running user profile manager, it's also a good starting point to have an idea of what is, if it is correctly configured, or do you have to tweak somewhere to get a better logon performance. You can run UPN config check on a VDA, and it will give you an overview of which directories you may additionally synchronize, or maybe not. Now the last one, because in the last project you may see the values. If you don't know what your infrastructure is doing, try to get the permission to install a Uber agent. It takes you about, you always say 30 minutes, I think it's 10 minutes if you're used to. You can install the agent and the Splunk component in about 10 minutes, and you really get massive insight of what could prevent your logons to go faster. And that is a real-world example here. When I started troubleshooting, it was about 95 seconds for the logon, and it turned out that they had some timeouts in the logon script. You see it was 20 seconds. 20 seconds, and if you start with the missing wire scan exclusions and to fix group policy settings and WMI filters you maybe have in place, you can see that you have a lot of room to improve your logon performance. And 40 seconds is, for a big company, really good value from my perspective. So there were all changes. You can see it here down below. That was December the 15th in the night. All the changes were replicated to the production, and on the other day it looked like this. So tremendous effect you can have when you try to optimize all of these settings. Now, if you're done with the project, it's always hard for an architect to leave a project and to create all the documentation you need in place for operations to take over and do the operation stuff. There's one cool thing I'm really using often in environments, and you should also, he's not here because he couldn't because of his plane, but try to run these scripts at the end of your deployment cycles, because it will automatically create a complete documentation of the settings and all the stuff you have done on it. It's really cool. You can run it like every day, and you will always have an up-to-date documentation. So it's really cool. And the other thing about operations is the maintenance you need to have in place. So if you're not running PBS or something like that, where you just reboot your server and you are up and running again, maybe you're running the classical way with hundreds of machines, you really need to deploy software as we did in the past, then you should always think about the times you need to do these changes, to create changes and to deploy software. And one thing that I also always use in big environments is Dane Young's rolling reboot script. This is really cool. You can customize it on your needs. It's a scheduled task that runs on your infrastructure and reboots in a rolling way your complete infrastructure. It's very cool. Then let's come to the conclusion. There are many things I haven't talked about because the time is, I have not much time to talk about anything, but if you start in such projects, it's crucial to have always the insight of what is happening in your infrastructure. Because sometimes you don't have the chance to do a proper sizing in front of the project, because you start from a presentation set of 4 font with 2000 3 as a base operating system, and you are migrating to 12 R2 with a totally different application set. So customers always come and say, so how many servers should we have in place for that? And I say, I don't know, cannot tell you. The only thing you can do to be successful at this point is that you measure from the beginning, and every change you do, every application you put on the infrastructure, you see directly what happens. That's the only chance how you can survive in such an environment. And last but not least, many teams in big organizations only see their small world they're administrating. From the Citrix side, to be successful with a good functioning XenApp environment, you should always see the big picture from above. Try to understand what the teams are doing, why they are doing, and try to get them in the right direction just to have a good running terminals. And one of the big rules here is don't be a jerk, because many big projects run for not only 2 months, they run sometimes 2 years. And if you screw up at the beginning, they won't help you anymore. So you should really try to make, that's the third rule, as much friends as possible. And if the world doesn't want to be saved, there are also a few, then to do yourself the favor and think of your heart and your nerves. If they don't want to be saved, then just let it go. That's for it. Make friends wherever possible. I will now have a beer at the bar. Hope some of you too. I hope it was somehow useful for you and nice day.